Alexander Hunt is the CEO of a hardware chain called Hunt's Hardware, a well-known brand with over 25 stores across 3 states. Inherited from his late father, the company has flourished under Alexander's leadership. Although revenue and profits are at a high, Alexander feels increasingly disconnected from what is truly happening in the stores. Before he passed away, Alexander's father taught him that trust is the foundation of all success. But now, amidst the numbers and meetings at headquarters, Alexander feels he has lost touch with both the employees and customers. On a morning filled with worry, Alexander received an email from a longtime customer complaining about the service attitude at one of the stores. It was simply a note mentioning that the service seemed rushed and unfriendly, but it made him start to worry. What was happening in his stores that he didn't know about? This feeling was like an alarm bell ringing inside him. After his father's death, Alexander took over the company and quickly focused on growth and expansion. But now, as he watched the company grow, he realized something important: the lack of personal connection with the hard-working people on the front lines, the ones who actually made the company exist and thrive. He had become too reliant on reports and numbers, forgetting that within them are people, stories that never get recorded in the statistics. Although he didn't want to admit it, Alexander felt he was losing a part of himself and the company's values. He decided to do something about it. Instead of just sitting in his office listening to reports from his subordinates, he wanted to experience the reality, understand the difficulties and challenges that employees faced every day. With a determination to change and start anew, Alexander decided to carry out an undercover operation in the store as a trial, where no one would know who he really was. He wanted to understand better what was happening in one of his stores, and store number 17, located in the suburban area, was where he decided to start. This was an opportunity for him to reconnect with the core values his father had built, and to see whether the employees still felt appreciated and supported as they deserved. With a different appearance and a fake name, Matt Turner, Alexander was ready to join the daily operations at the store as a new employee. He didn't want anyone to recognize him as the CEO of the company and wanted to observe as objectively as possible. Although a bit anxious, Alexander knew that this was the only opportunity to reconnect and better understand his company, as well as see how he could improve the things that had caused the company to lose its credibility. On a Monday morning, after receiving a complaint email from a customer about the rushed and unfriendly service at store number 17, Alexander could not shake off a sense of unease. This was the first time in his career as CEO that he felt a gap in his management of the stores and a disconnect from the employees. Instead of relying solely on monthly reports and data from department heads, he needed to understand what was really happening in the stores he owned. Particularly, one of the stores he wanted to learn more about was store number 17, located in a busy area, but also facing many issues related to manpower and customer service. Despite being a store with stable revenue, Alexander always felt uncertain about what was really going on there. The complaints from customers were just the tip of the iceberg, and he needed to uncover the root causes to address them effectively. Alexander decided to conduct an undercover operation at the store where no one would know he was the CEO. To do so, he chose to pretend to be a new employee. He had a friend in the HR department help him apply for a seasonal worker position under the fake name Matt Turner. He bought a standard worker's uniform, wore a fake beard, and prepared a simple name tag to blend in with the work environment. This way, Alexander could observe the issues firsthand at the store without drawing attention, and he hoped to identify the real causes behind the customer complaints. He looked forward to having a chance to approach the employees, understand their relationships with one another, as well as with the management, especially how they treated younger, newer staff members. The unfamiliar feeling of walking into the store as a new employee forced Alexander to face a reality he had not anticipated. Right upon entering the store that morning, he could sense an atmosphere of tension, unfriendliness, and a lack of communication among the employees. The smiles and professionalism he always wanted his company to maintain seemed to be absent here. He immediately noticed signs of rushed service and a lack of care for the customers. As soon as he walked in, Alexander met a middle-aged female employee behind the counter who glanced at him once and asked him to wait in the break area because the shift supervisor hadn't arrived yet. This made him realize that the attitude of the employees at the store seemed to be unwelcoming, and they were unwilling to assist customers. He went to the break area where two young employees, Penny and Parker, were resting. Both looked exhausted, one barely awake, the other scrolling through their phone, showing signs that they were overwhelmed by work. Penny quickly spoke to him, introducing herself, and Penny quietly told him that Parker had just completed a 12-hour shift the previous day, and both of them were drained. This made Alexander even more concerned about the working conditions at this store. He had not anticipated that the employees would be working so hard without any care or support from the higher-ups. Before he could ask anything further, a tall, tough man who seemed to be a superior walked in and loudly ordered all the employees to start working immediately. This man was Derek, a supervisor with a rather unfriendly attitude. With a stern demeanor, Derek quickly ordered Alexander under the fake name Matt to start working immediately, and insisted that no one should rest except during lunch breaks. There was no consideration for the feelings or condition of the employees. Derek's only demand was for everyone to work quickly and efficiently. Watching Parker and Penny assigned heavy tasks without support or adequate rest made Alexander even more worried. The young employees had to work outside under the scorching sun, hauling heavy bags of soil without gloves or any protection. The lack of concern for their health and workplace safety made him realize even more that the store was poorly managed and lacked support from higher management. The first day of working undercover as a new employee revealed a clear picture of the company's condition that Alexander had never imagined. The deficiencies and poor management at this store not only affected the employees, but could also lead to customer complaints, like the email he received initially. This was when Alexander realized that he needed to take immediate action to change the situation and protect the values his company was losing. On Alexander's first day as an employee at store number 17, the dire situation his company was facing became vividly clear. While young employees like Parker and Penny struggled with heavy workloads without the necessary support, Derek, the supervisor, continued to maintain a cold and harsh attitude. He not only managed in an inhumane way, but also showed no concern for the safety or exhaustion of the employees. Derek's orders were always given in an authoritarian tone, making the atmosphere in the store even more tense. When Matthew, under the fake name Matt, saw Parker struggling with 60-pound bags of dirt, exhausted and barely able to move, he couldn't sit still. The sight broke his heart. Parker, a small boy, could barely move with the huge workload Derek had assigned him. Meanwhile, Derek stood from a distance yelling for Parker to move faster. There was no care, no support, only threats and reproach. Penny, though, also forced to work under the scorching heat, intervened when she saw Derek about to lash out at Parker. She said, "Don't say anything more. He's exhausted." But Derek saw this as a provocation, and his patience quickly ran out. "If you don't want to end up like Parker, then shut up and work," Derek shouted. And all Penny could do was lower her head in silence. Both young employees were treated as mere tools with no voice, no right to demand better working conditions. Standing to the side, Alexander felt his heart tighten. He couldn't do anything to protect the employees because if he revealed himself as the CEO, everything would collapse. But he couldn't ignore it. The cruelty of Derek and his disregard for the employees etched deeply into Alexander's mind. The sight of Parker, weak and exhausted, collapsing and struggling to get back up to work was unbearable for Alexander. He looked at Derek, unable to overlook his brutal behavior and lack of empathy. Though he wanted to intervene and protect the employees, Alexander knew he had to continue observing and gather more information. This was necessary so that when he returned to the company, he could take decisive action. However, his heart kept churning as he realized that Derek wasn't just abusing his power, but was also making a system that seemed stable, rot from the inside. Alexander began to see that this battle was not just about one store, but about restoring ethics throughout the entire company. The following day, as Parker and Penny were again given heavy tasks and customers complained about understaffing and poor service, Alexander could no longer stay idle. He felt that this injustice had to end. Every story from the employees, every grievance from the young workers being exploited, made Alexander realize that the company needed a complete overhaul from the ground up. These injustices could not continue, and Alexander was determined to take action. but he knew he needed more time to better understand the store's operations and figure out how to change everything sensibly without anyone suspecting his true identity. The more he watched and listened, the more Alexander realized that this fight would not be easy, but he couldn't turn back. These employees deserved a fair workplace, and he would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant facing sudden and difficult changes within the company. The next day, Alexander returned to the store with a sense of tension but determination. He had witnessed enough wrongdoing from Derek and began to realize the gravity of the situation. The way Derek treated the employees, especially the young ones like Parker and Penny, was not only disrespectful but also an abuse of power. Every task they were assigned was unfair, unsuitable for their capabilities, and completely lacked the necessary support. While the more experienced employees sat in the cool air of the store, Parker and Penny had to labor under the scorching sun without water gloves or any protection. As Alexander walked around the store, he couldn't help but notice signs of deprivation, staff shortages, lack of care for employees, and irresponsibility in maintaining workplace safety. He stood by the checkout counter when a customer complained about the delays in service, but when he looked closer, he realized that the employees weren't lacking in ability, but in support and guidance from management. The tension in the store's atmosphere made everything chaotic, and this was clearly affecting the quality of service customers received. In particular, while employees were struggling to complete their tasks under Derek's harsh supervision, others like Travis, the so-called assistant manager, had an indifferent attitude and didn't participate in assisting or solving problems. He was only concerned about using his phone and appeared very irresponsible. Alexander noticed that not just Derek, but the entire store management system lacked genuine care for both employees and customers. These behaviors were not just Derek's personal issue, but part of a loose management system, where power abuse and injustice existed under the supervision of those who were incompetent and irresponsible. Alexander felt he could not delay any longer. He began to realize that if he didn't intervene immediately, this store and perhaps the entire company would continue to fall into a bad state, affecting not only the employees but also the reputation of Ellis Hardware. During lunch break, when Parker sat down to rest his exhausted face showing clear signs of fatigue, Alexander approached and asked, "Are you okay?" Parker simply answered briefly, "Just tired. I can't leave until the work is done." Alexander's heart sank as he saw the disappointment in Parker's eyes. The boy no longer felt like a valued worker, but more like a machine, existing only to get the job done. Penny and Parker's stories made Alexander feel he had to act immediately. Penny told him about Parker's situation, how he was working to pay for his mother's medical bills, while himself facing unfairly long working hours. These stories felt like wounds in Alexander's heart, making it impossible for him to turn away from the truth. He knew that this had to change. These employees did not deserve to endure such injustice. They deserved to be treated fairly and with respect. At the end of the day, after reflecting on everything that had happened, Alexander decided he could no longer stay hidden and watch it all unfold. He had gathered enough information to take action. The next day he would return to the store, not as a new employee, but as the true owner of the company. He would not allow Derek and the other power abusers to continue destroying his employees. Alexander had seen the shortcomings in the store's operations and realized that the change had to start with him. He could not remain silent while his company and employees were being denied fairness. What he had witnessed could not wait any longer, and Alexander was determined to act. The next morning, Alexander arrived at store number 17 earlier than usual, and this time he was no longer Matt Turner, a new employee, but Alexander Hunt, the CEO of Ellis Hardware. He knew that in order to change the situation, he had to face the truth and stand up for the employees who had been mistreated. By now, he had gathered enough evidence and was determined not to let things continue as they were. His mood was tense but also filled with resolve. Because of what he had seen over the past few days, he could not turn a blind eye. As he entered the store, there was no longer any sense of nervousness or unfamiliarity. Alexander confidently walked through the front door. Despite being a CEO, he still felt the need to show the employees that they mattered and that the company stood by them. He went straight to Linda, the area manager whom he had called the night before and requested to meet with. Early. Good morning. Linda. Alexander said, his voice firm, yet full of concern. Can you help me invite Derek and Travis to the office? Linda looked at him, a moment of surprise crossing her face, but she quickly nodded. She realized this wasn't just a normal meeting, but a major change. When Derek and Travis entered the office, their faces were full of questions and concern. Alexander stood up, his gaze full of determination. I'm Alexander Hunt. He began, looking them straight in the eye. I'm the owner of this company, and I'm here to address some issues that need to change immediately. Derek and Travis stood silently, trying to understand what was happening. Before they could speak, Alexander continued. We've received reports of disrespect and abuse of power towards the employees, and I can't let this continue. Derek, I'm firing you immediately for your actions that have created a toxic work environment for your staff. Derek opened his mouth to protest, but Alexander didn't give him the chance. Travis, you're not exempt. You've witnessed this and remained indifferent to the mistreatment. You can no longer stay here. You're fired immediately as well. Both of them stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard, especially Derek, who had always thought he could control everything at the store, now had to face the consequences of his cruelty and abuse of power. This is the result of your actions, Alexander said, his voice unwavering. But I won't stop here. We're going to rebuild this place from the ground up. As Derek and Travis were escorted out of the office, Alexander turned back to Linda. You will change everything that's been happening here, he ordered. We'll start by ensuring the employees aren't overworked, that they have reasonable break times, and that workplace safety standards are ensured. I will personally oversee everything in the coming days. Linda, still somewhat surprised, nodded and left the room. After this meeting, Alexander felt a sense of relief, but he knew this was just the first step in a larger reform. He not only wanted to change the management approach, but also to create a working environment where every employee felt respected and valued. When the store opened to customers, Alexander stood on a small table in the middle of the sales area, drawing the attention of all the employees. I am Alexander Hunt. He began, his voice clear and strong. In the space I've been working here for the past few days, under a fake name, and I've witnessed the shortcomings in how you've been treated. I understand that the company has failed to maintain a fair and respectful environment that will change today. He went on to make commitments. All employees under the age of 18 would not work more than 30 hours a week. There would be workplace safety training, and every employee would have proper break times. We will also increase support from management to ensure that the work is fairly distributed and no one is overburdened. The employees began to sigh in relief, and some even started clapping, though with a cautious attitude. These changes could help them, but would they truly be sustained? The important thing was that Alexander had initiated this process, and he would not turn back. In just one morning, Store 17 had witnessed a change they never thought possible, and this was only the beginning. Major adjustments would follow, but at least now they knew they had a leader who would listen and respect them. Alexander was determined to change not just one store, but the entire company culture. After firing Derek and Travis and making the initial changes to the working processes, Alexander decided to stay at Store 17 for the entire day to oversee the implementation of the reform measures. He knew that changing a company's culture couldn't happen overnight, but he also realized that making a difference started with concrete and decisive actions. The employees began to feel the change in the work environment, along with the increased benefits for employees. New rules were established. Employees under the age of 18 would not work more than 30 hours per week. All employees would get proper break times, and most importantly, physically demanding tasks would be redistributed fairly, ensuring no one had to work under the stress and hardship they had before. Penny, who had been working long hours without rest, now felt relieved. She was promoted to a team leader position responsible for training new employees, and her salary was increased. This was not only a recognition of her dedication, but also a sign that the company truly valued the development and acknowledgement of internal talent. Parker, the young man who had been overworking to pay his mother's medical bills, now received support from the company. Alexander helped him secure a scholarship and would adjust his work schedule to accommodate his studies. These actions made Parker feel not only secure in his job, but also hopeful about his future. He no longer felt abandoned, and his work now had more meaning, not just to earn money, but as the first step toward building a better future. Along with the changes within the company, Alexander noticed that customer attitudes began to shift as well. Customers found the atmosphere in the store more pleasant and friendly as employees were no longer tense or rushed. The enthusiastic and professional service attitude was gradually restored, and the company began receiving positive feedback from customers. However, despite the significant progress, Alexander knew that this change could not happen overnight. He continued to stay at the store, participating in daily activities, not as the owner, but as part of the working team. He spent time talking with employees, addressing issues that arose and ensuring that the new values he had implemented would be maintained for the long term. At a meeting after a few weeks, when the changes had begun to take root in the store's culture, Alexander stood before his team of employees and spoke. "We are rebuilding from the mistakes of the past. The most important thing is that each of you feels respected and valued. We work together, not for profit, but for fairness and mutual respect." Alexander's words ignited hope and trust in the team. They began to feel the real change within the company, and the values Alexander brought were not just a promise, but a real commitment. By firing Derek and Travis and making changes to the personnel management, Alexander created a new foundation for the company. Store 17 not only returned to a healthier work environment, but also became a model for other stores in the chain. These improvements were gradually expanded, and other stores began to adopt the employee welfare policies like Store 17. Alexander's company started to receive respect and affection from customers because they knew that here, employees were valued, and the company didn't just chase profit, but also respected ethics and fairness. This was the difference Alexander had brought. This story is not just about changing one store, but about a change in how a company views its employees. Alexander not only saved one store, but also created a new culture for the company where every employee is valued and has the opportunity to grow. This is the beginning of a sustainable future where justice and fairness are always prioritized. A month after the changes at Store 17, Alexander felt more at ease when he saw that the work atmosphere here was completely different. Employees no longer felt exploited. Instead, they were treated with respect and given opportunities for growth. Penny and Parker, the young employees who had once been overworked, now had the chance to learn and advance. Both began to feel valued in the company, not just as anonymous workers, but as key contributors to the overall development. Penny, promoted to team leader with a higher salary, started training new employees with confidence and responsibility. Parker, supported by the company's scholarship, could focus on his studies without the worry of overwork. These actions not only changed their personal lives, but also created a healthier working environment for the entire staff. The atmosphere in the store became more pleasant, and customers began to return with trust. They noticed the difference in the service attitude of the employees, feeling that they were treated with respect and professionalism. The store was no longer just selling products, but was creating a positive experience for customers, making them want to come back next time. These changes began to spread to other stores in the chain. Alexander continued to stay at the store during the early weeks, participating in daily activities and talking with employees. He made sure that the reforms were not just limited to Store 17, but would be applied across the entire system. Although the company was gradually getting back on track, Alexander knew that this was just the beginning. A solid foundation had been established, but to sustain this change, he needed to continue monitoring and ensuring that the new values were always followed through. Every time Alexander visited the store, he spent time talking with employees, getting their opinions and feelings about the company. He listened to their stories and shared experiences not just about work, but also about their personal lives. These stories made him realize that real change came not only from company policies, but also from a shift in leadership. He was no longer just someone who gave orders from above, but part of the team always ready to listen and provide support when needed. Both Penny and Parker could feel the significant difference since Alexander stepped in and began making changes. Penny, after being promoted and becoming a mentor to new employees, felt more confident in her leadership role. She understood that her role was not only to work, but also to help others grow. She began to build better relationships with other employees, sharing her experience and knowledge to help them work more effectively. Surprisingly, the challenges she had faced before now became opportunities to showcase her leadership skills. Parker, after receiving the scholarship to continue his education, felt a renewed sense of hope. He no longer felt the pressure to overwork just to earn money and could now focus on his studies and personal development. Everything had changed, not just in his work, but in his future. Parker knew he could pursue his dreams without sacrificing his health or enduring injustice. Every day, seeing Penny and Parker growing more confident and mature in their work, Alexander felt that he was on the right path. Both were clear examples of how change within the company could impact employees' personal lives, creating a positive cycle where everyone benefited. With the ongoing changes, Alexander realized that rebuilding trust wasn't just about changing policies or regulations. It was about creating an environment where every employee felt valued and could grow. This required patience, listening, and a commitment to maintaining the values he had restored in the company. Alexander had learned that no matter how big a company is, it still needs to be built on real people. All the numbers and strategies can only succeed with the support of dedicated employees who work not just for a paycheck, but because they trust the organization they work for. The changes within the company couldn't happen overnight, but with commitment and continuous effort, Alexander believed the company would continue to grow sustainably and fairly. Although Alexander's company was heading in the right direction, he knew that the journey of rebuilding trust and fairness wouldn't end here. Every day was a new challenge, and he would never stop monitoring, listening, and changing. Employees like Penny and Parker were proof of this change, but many others in the company needed the opportunity to develop and show their potential. At the end of the day, Alexander stepped out of the store and looked up at the starry sky. Although he knew that the road ahead would still be tough, he felt more confident than ever. His story wasn't just about changing one store. It was about changing a system, creating a company where justice and fairness truly exist. And most importantly, Alexander knew that he wouldn't have to face these challenges alone.